TitleMatchNetwork.com.
Well, I wrestled amateur for 7 years back down in Tampa, Florida. And I wrestled one of the great Malenko's kids. Back then it was Shelly.
Right.
And now he wrestles as Dean Malenko. And he took a look at me and said, well, hey, why don't you come out and give it a try? This was many, many moons ago. And I went out there and said, yeah, I'll do it part-time, a couple years here and there before I go into something else. And we ended up going on there 14 years.
Were you a wrestling fan growing up?
Not really, no. I've seen the great Malenko a few times, and he was like one of the scariest people I ever met. And he was just like, ooh, this guy was too much and everything. But he took me in and he started showing me the ropes. Little amateur background, and then what he taught me was the rest.
So basically he was your mentor, Dean's father?
Dean's father started me off, and then he introduced me to a man, Carl Gotch. And Carl Gotch is probably one of the greatest shoot wrestlers in the world. He's got to be near 80 today, and I'll tell you what, he's probably still one of the toughest men I know.
Talk about the training that you went through, as far as
well, when you're going from amateur into professional, of course, it's a lot different. You've got your falls and everything, and your bumps that you learn how to take. People knock it so much to say, well, how can you get hurt? It's all fake, But when you got in that ring and you start hitting the ropes, just running the ropes back and forth, I've seen people come up with bruises from head to toe. Didn't know how they got there. Well, just hit them ropes a few times and you'll know what it's about. Then when you learn how to fall, it's falling not where you're going to get hurt, but controlling your body and controlling your opponent's body or your partner's body.
Right.
Today's standard is your partner's body. And once you learn that, it takes off from there.
What was the most valuable lesson that you were taught when you first started in the business?
Take care of yourself and the people you're in the ring with, because there's always somebody out there jealous who will try to hurt you. And pretty much that's what happened to me at the end.
What were some of the first territories that you worked?
My first territory I ever started was in Canada, Brunswick, New Brunswick or something, I don't know.
Huh.
Somewhere up in Canada for Emile Dupree.
Right.
And I lasted there 3 weeks.
Why is that?
I just couldn't take being away from home so much, and I lasted 3 weeks there. I came back home. I took like 3 or 4 months off, and I started in California.
What year was that around California?
Ooh, I'm going to say it was like 1980.
Right. Was Roddy Piper back there? I think he was.
Roddy Piper just left. He just left there.
Did you have any run-ins with him?
No.
No, okay, so you didn't. What was the locker room like at the time?
The locker room was quiet. I mean, there was no, the animosity wasn't like it is from what I hear about it today.
Right.
But the locker room was quiet, and nobody hassled anybody. It was just, it was still a sport.
Right. What are your memories of Buzz Sawyer?
Buzz Sawyer was a character. He was a great amateur wrestler also, from down in Florida.
Right.
And he was good. Buzz Sawyer was a pretty good athlete at one time, and I guess the showbiz got to him.
Also, I believe Buddy Rose was in the dressing room at the time when you were down there.
Yeah, Buddy Rose was down there. He's another character. A lot of characters in this business.
Any good stories on either of those two?
No, not really.
From there, where did you go after that?
From there I went to Ohio. They started a little group out in Ohio, out of Pensacola.
Would that be for the Fullers, or?
Yeah, Ron Fuller started running one up there and didn't go out too good. So there was another 3-week territory. Moved down to Pensacola and stayed there a few months. Went into New Zealand, and that's when I started.
How different was the locker room back then as to now, and what do you prefer?
I prefer back then. Everybody stayed to themselves and did their jobs, did what they were supposed to do, and left it in the locker room. That was it.
Now, I don't know what year exactly it was that you went down to Texas for Joe Blanchard for Southwest Championship Wrestling. What year was that around?
I'm going to say that was like 82, 83.
What are your memories about Joe Blanchard?
Joe Blanchard was a good guy. He was a pretty good guy. And he was one that, to me, he wanted to keep it as wrestling, as a sport the way it was, and that's what he tried to do.
Who were some of the guys that you worked with down there?
Oh, man, I couldn't tell you. I don't remember. Back then, it was...
I know the sheep herders were down there.
Yeah, it wasn't the bushwhackers, it was sheep herders. and it wasn't Butch, it was John Boyd.
Right.
And Luke was a good guy. Luke was he was up and up. John, you couldn't turn your back on. He'd give it to you. But Luke was right up.
Thoughts on Bobby Jaggers and Bob Sweetan?
Bobby Jaggers was, like I said, they're all characters. Bob Sweetan, you couldn't really turn your back on another. He was another, whatever it took to backstab you or get ahead, Bob Sweetan did it. Jaggers was a little bit of a fool, but a really good guy. He was up and up too.
What was the road schedule like back then? Because I know they did, the TV tapings in the supermarket?
Yeah.
Right.
And they had the junction.
Right.
It was a junction back then. The road trips weren't that bad. It was maybe 1,500 miles a week compared to last territory that I was working like that outside of WWF was 2,500, 3,000 driving and about 10,000 flying.
How many nights a week did
we
they
go
run?
6, 7 nights a week.
For Southwest?
Yeah.
Wow. Scott Casey was there at the time.
Scott Casey was a good guy. He was an athlete too. He didn't really look like much of a wrestler, but Scott Casey could go. At the time, Scott was a little bit older than I was, and we'd go to the gym and he'd outdo me on the bench press. And back then I was in the 4s and he did it like nothing.
Huh. I think you were in a program with Adrian Street at the time in Southwest Championship.
Yeah.
What was he like to work with?
Adrian wasn't a bad guy. His gimmick and mine didn't clash at all.
Right.
And he wanted to do things that, no. Like I said, you learn how to take care of yourself, and sometimes you have to say no, and that's what I did.
TitleMatchNetwork.com